Everyone, my name is Shelby Blanton, and for my presentation, I'm doing anthropogenic impacts on Florida aquifers. So aquifers are stored groundwater underneath the surface in which we draw our water from for agricultural land uses, and as well as being 90% of our drinking water in Florida. Aquifers also supply springs, and sometimes those springs supply other things like rivers that then supports ecosystems, as well as being great for recreational use such as swimming, canoeing, and snorkeling. And with this being something that's important to us, we have to think about what is the problem. So the first problem is overdrafting, in which we take too much water from a source and more than what can be replenished into it, and therefore we deplete the water source. In 2015, we used about 6,000 million gallons per day of fresh water, and of that, 39% of it was public use, so from the personal residents themselves. And we can see that over time, this has greatly increased for public supply. And from the 1970s to 2015, the amount of water we're using daily has gone up by 170%. Why has it gone up? A possible correlation is population size, which has increased by 192% between the 1970s and 2015. So now, or at least in 2015, we were at 20 million Floridians that were using water. But on top of that, we're also a huge site for tourist attractions and tourism. So not only are there 20 million Florida residents using our water, but 106.6 million, or 5 times the size of our population size in our state, coming in and using our water as well. And though they may not use the majority of water because they're not here the whole time, they most definitely are creating a dent within our aquifer supply. Outside of this, there's also our government selling out our springs to big corporations, which is pretty funny to me, where they bottle the water and then they sell it back to us. Super redundant, unnecessary, especially because we can probably just get the water without the plastic cheaper. Another problem is contamination. One that's really old but can exist today in how long the contamination survives in the water is arsenic being used in fertilizer, pesticides, and once upon a time cattle dipping vats, which was an early 1900s practice. On top of that, there was also nitrate nitrogen concentrations, which tested greater around agriculture sites, residential areas, and septic systems than less populated areas and forest lands. And these are related to fertilizers that we now use today, full of nitrogen. And of course, this creates something we're all well familiar with, which is algae blooms, which creates a disgusting smell. It ruins drinking water and it destroys ecosystems. Outside of that, there's also emerging contaminants which weren't regularly regulated or really well known of being in water. And recently, in like 2014, the Department of Environmental Protection found that pharmaceuticals are tested within 12% of our unconfined wells. So this is something that's new and that we should be worried about. So what is being done? As I stated on the last slide, there is testing being done for contaminants in water. Again, there are emerging contaminants, so we might not know everything that's in the water, but there is a method of using sucralose to put it into the system and see where it tests positive at, to see how well our treatments work and how well the natural filtering through into the wells is working. And then wherever it tests positive, we also would then test there for other contaminants. As for like government action, there are government mandates requiring the Department of Environmental Protection to test water regularly and to have set total maximum daily loads for contaminants like nitrate. This is again only just a guideline though. This doesn't really take any action on the companies putting in the contaminants. So this is where we would bring in Basin Management Action Plan. It basically partners up with the companies who contribute to the contamination and have them change their practices and systems to alternatives that are aimed to reduce the amount of contamination going into the soil and waters. Is there an issue with this? While there might be other contaminants or setbacks of using the alternatives for the practices and systems, I don't see really a problem right now. I think it's really good we're trying to reduce the contamination level. And on top of that, we use so much fertilizer and pesticides on our crops that another idea for changing how much contamination is going in is having genetically modified crops to be more durable. Um, and that way we can reduce the use of those two chemical contaminant offering sources. Outside of this, when looking at aquifer levels, there is legislation aiming to prevent depletion, such as the minimum flows and levels. And I've talked about them here, talking about they're set at being when aquifer supply is dangerously low or the ecosystems they support are at risk of not being supported. But outside of that, they also are required to have plans and programs to save, protect, and prevent extreme low levels or complete drying up of our aquifer sources. And I've given a couple examples of the prevention plans and recovery plans. Do I see an issue with this? Not really. I think right now it's really good that legislation isn't just giving guidelines, they actually are requiring plans and programs being set. So we not only have a first plan, we have a backup plan and a backup plan to that backup plan. What else can we do outside of this information I provided? Well, we can always use treated water for irrigation, as well as collect rainwater on pavement that can't reach our aquifer wells, and use that water for irrigation as long as we don't leave it out to get stagnant. So now that I've listed some of the major problems and solutions, we also have to consider other problems that might affect our solutions that I offered and future solutions. And on this slide, all I talk about is how legislation overall can change at any time. Our government has the power; they can create good for the environment, but they can also take it away based on what they consider is more important. And so, while we can say something as people of this country and this state and this city as well, you have to be prepared to say what you have to, or maybe even sign a petition, just because they won't be easy getting to say something if a bill is being put in the process of being passed. Because at some point, what we have laid out now might be changed because of a bill being passed. So, on final notes, we are highly dependent on our aquifers, especially in Florida. There's numerous reasons I've given, but overall, we're also 70% water, so we have to have water to survive. So, we should care about what happens to our fresh water resources. Is there more we should be doing? Like I mentioned on the past slide, always new obstacles to come, always something for us to do, and on top of whatever we already have in place, personally, there's steps we can always take, such as trying to reduce the amount of water we use ourselves and find alternative sources of water that isn't our fresh water to go towards things that we don't really need to be putting fresh water into. And that is all I have for you guys. Thank you so much.